Hi folks, so this first week what we're dealing with is just the issue of what on earth philosophy is in the first place. Folks at BG and just folks in general tend not to have taken any philosophy in the past, and so what I like to do with the first part of my class is just tell people what they're actually getting into. People have a lot of preconceptions about philosophy. It tends to get kind of a bad rap in literature and even in academia. So this lecture I'm just going to run through real quickly a little bit about what philosophy is and what philosophers actually do. So what is it? Well, philosophy, if you wanted to break it down into terms you're probably more familiar with, you could say it's part history, it's part psychology, it's part English, but there are some parts that are totally new too. So in terms of history, philosophy's been around for a long time. Philosophy started in ancient Greece, even before about 400 BC. So there's a lot of philosophy in the past, and philosophy has been present in and about pretty much all of the major events of history. Philosophy is part psychology in that we deal a lot with humans and what they're like, what they think, what they do. So you can't do philosophy as a human being without thinking a little bit about what humans are and how they work. And it's part English in that philosophy also has a very strong literary tradition. So it's important to realize that philosophy is part academic, but there's also a strong sense of performance to it. Well, some of the philosophers we're going to read this semester, in fact the very first ones we're going to read, write in dialogue form. It's almost like a little play. So there's a lot of sort of strong narrative to it as well. The translation of philosophy from ancient Greek translates to the love of wisdom. It's philos is love, and Sophia is wisdom. Woohoo, right? It's a pretty name. So, what do you mean love of wisdom, right? What does that boil down to? Well, what philosophers are really looking for, even though sometimes we lose track of that, is how do we live our lives better? How do we do what we do in the right sorts of ways, and how do we figure out how to improve our lives? But philosophy tends to lose its way sometimes because we like to dig into really juicy, nasty problems, and we get a kind of bad reputation for it as a result. Philosophy has traditionally been made fun of, and I say underappreciated. Some people think just plain made fun of. Right, there's a strong tradition of movies that feature people working, convenience store jobs for the past 40 years, and there's a throwaway line, yeah, I majored in philosophy. Well, yeah, sometimes that happens, right? But that can happen with any degree. Part of my job, right, is to defend my own major. But, right, philosophers also go on to be doctors, they go on to be lawyers. Philosophers, in fact, score the highest on business school tests, on the LSAT, on the MCAT, so it's not all bad. And of course, philosophy, maybe its biggest preconceived notion is that all philosophers are stoners, right? So you get a lot of, these preconceived notions. People sit around going, yeah, man, whoa, how do I know that the colors I see are the same as the colors you see? And, well, yeah, that is actually a question philosophers ask. There's actually a lot of interesting science and philosophy behind that. But this also leads to us getting this bad rap. And philosophy is the sort of thing that tends toward things that would blow your mind, man. So maybe we deserve a little bit of this label, but there's some good to it as well. So what do we actually do when you get past all the preconceived notions? Well, philosophers study these big questions. We ask things like, what is the meaning of life? How does cause and effect work? What does it mean to say that I know something? Is there a God, or are there gods? Is there an afterlife? These are all really hard questions, and the trouble with doing philosophy is most of them we haven't answered. That's not to say that we don't have answers at all. A lot of philosophy has actually gotten a lot of very good things done. In fact, most sciences started off in ancient Greece as philosophy. So a lot of what we now call science was done by philosophers to start off with. Biology, chemistry, psychology, physics, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, logic, and way more are all done by philosophers now and started off entirely by philosophers in their inception. People like Aristotle are famous not only for being a scientist, but they were philosophers first and foremost. Descartes is the same way if you want to think about something like math. Once you start finding answers, then these things tend to split off into their own disciplines. But until you do, they start off as philosophy. So a lot of what we're going to do in philosophy is deal with the questions that we haven't found solid answers to yet. So what are we going to do? Well, this class will give you a short tour through the history of philosophy and some of its big questions. Here's the thing, a lot of these questions are really, really hard to answer, and so chances are we're not going to come out with hard and fast solutions. Instead, we're going to have to fight against what's called skepticism. Skepticism is the issue, the worry that maybe there just aren't answers at all. So this is our task for the semester, and I hope you're looking forward to it just as much as I am.